Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Chick. I'm Academic Director of the INSEAD Healthcare Management Initiative, as well as Professor of Technology and Operations Management based in Fontainebleau. Today's webinar is Scaling Innovation in Genetics and Precision Medicine. It's part of the Tech Talk X series by INSEAD Digital. And we're very thankful for the support of Accenture and being able to bring to you some of the greatest, latest and greatest breakthroughs in digital technologies and their applications, as well as the impact that they have on business management and society. Today, we're very delighted to be able to welcome several experts in the space of genetics and precision medicine and analytics to support better health decision-making. Thank you, Sandra. A little bit about webinar etiquette today. The audience, thank you for joining. It's great to see a large number of people here. You're muted with video off and the chat box is closed, but there is a question and answer tab where you can suggest some questions for the speakers. You can also upvote questions so that we can try to identify the most relevant questions for you. This webinar is being recorded, and if you do have some technical issues, please do email digital@insead.edu. Sandra? Yep. So we do have a couple of questions. We'd love to get to know you a little bit further. Poll question 1, why are you interested in precision medicine? So I'm going to ask you to pick one answer here. You're working in pharma, medtech, biotech in terms of research or deployment? Are you more on the healthcare services side? Are you coming from a machine learning or analytics or IT perspective? Is your interest because you're an investor or because you're a payer? Or perhaps, like many people working in the health space, is there a personal experience that's really driving you? The second question that we would have in the poll question panel that should have come up for you is, where do you think analytics and machine learning can have the biggest impact? Do you see that as being in diagnostics, precision medicine, other medical decision-making, supply chain or operational issues in healthcare, or other issues around patient engagement, patient acquisition? If you could lock those responses in, we'd be very thankful so we can get to know you a little bit better. Very interesting results. Thank you, Sandra. It looks like about a third of us that have replied are working in the pharma, medtech, biotech space. About a fifth of us are working in healthcare services or investment as well. And not so many people on the payer side here today. A number of people reflecting information technology and analytics backgrounds and personal situations as well. Looks like a lot of people are thinking that diagnostics and precision medicine are going to be the big areas, and that's great news for this panel session, because I think this is where we're going to be able to hit quite strongly. So thank you so much for your responses on that, and I'm sure our panelists will be delighted to get that information. Before I introduce each of those panelists, I'd love to share an observation or a couple of observations about precision medicine. And so, Sandra, thank you for flipping over. Given the responses that you've just made, that about 3/4 of us are already working in this sort of a space, you're not going to be surprised. You know that genomics is no longer science fiction, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things before we go to the panel sessions. First of all, the cost of sequencing genetic information has been dropping dramatically, even faster than the rate of improvements in the cost of computing resources, the famous Moore's law, where computing power is half as expensive every 18 months and has been doing so for decades. A similar story is true for the cost of gene sequencing. Even in 2015, $1,000 to sequence the whole genome. I think that's an amazing breakthrough that's really opening the opportunity for a lot of great business models. Sandra, if you could step forward. Yep. And so because this is a new technology, there's been a lot of attempts at different ways to create value and capture value in this space. One of the early case studies that I'm sure very many of you are familiar with would be 23andMe, which was compiling a lot of data based on genetic tests, looking to use genomic data to develop new drugs initially. But as often is the case, when there's brand new technologies, uh, sometimes there's regulation comes in, and appropriately so. And I think in this case, the question was, can we validate the evidence? Are we really able to reflect appropriate risk factors associated with genetic information? And so the FDA really pushed back a bit. And so a lot of the initial work by 23andMe was around ancestry and providing people information about their family histories, until the point where additional evidence was collected. And one of our panelists here today is from CircaGene. So Francois will be able to speak to some of the issues associated with the development of large amounts of data being brought to use to try to help inform patients as well as drug development. Sandra? So as we go beyond the genomic, so we've seen that the cost of genomic data is dramatically decreasing. We've seen some initial industry shifts as people try to develop new business models. I want to highlight, though, that it's not just purely genetics, despite the title of the webinar. Precision medicine can really build on other factors as well. Genomics, the DNA of the genome can then influence how RNA is expressed. So a field called RNA transcriptomics then develops into proteins. And all of these are different ways that we can get at signals or biomarkers of patients. And one of the panelists here today, Julien, FBB Biomed, is really working in the space around RNA analysis. So it's kind of fitting in naturally into the progression and expression of DNA towards RNA and onto proteins, and then into therapies in principle. We've seen a lot of activity in rare diseases, lentivirus, the CRISPR-Cas9 technologies emerging for gene editing activities. We also see the development of specific drugs. We've seen Herceptin as one of the early drugs with Genentech around really trying to do profiling and oncology treatment. So rare disease and oncology would be two areas where we've seen some really neat progress, where biomarkers can be identified. Prognostic biomarkers, which really indicate, well, what is the likely outcome of the disease independent of treatment, and then predictive biomarkers, which might help indicate, well, whether a medicine or a treatment can actually operate better because of the particular genomic or RNA transcriptomic profiles of the patient. And so we're seeing a lot of exciting work, particularly rare diseases and oncology, and lots of attempts in other areas as well. Sandra, if you could step forward. Thank you. One of those areas that we were very fortunate to be active with is with some of our collaborators at Academic Medical Center Amsterdam, UMC Amsterdam. I'd like to give a shout out to Alexander Vlaar, who is a former MBA student here from INSEAD, and who is also the head of the intensive care units at the hospital. And we worked with his colleagues, as well as some colleagues at the University of Athens Medical Center, University College London hospitals in London, and industrial partner Biomed, around trying to identify diagnostics, treatments for sepsis. So sepsis being the #1 killer of patients in hospitals, very expensive, very huge in terms of mortality. So we were trying to build on some work that was done with a sepsis collaboration, the Mars collaboration, to identify RNA transcriptomic data into multiple endotypes or clusters of patients. And it turns out that with some of those clusters, there seems to be an effect around vascular function, around the ability of holding liquids, I guess, if you will, and maintaining blood pressure. And so with that, we were trying to identify what could be different treatments that might work better for certain patients with certain types of profiles. So this is an ongoing project. We're still iterating on this. But what this project led me to see up front in this is that there are a couple of different approaches for trying to get at precision medicine based on genomic or RNA transcriptomic data. And one of those is using machine learning, very much phenomenological models, predictive models, some of the AI tools that you've often been hearing about that make associations and learn with unstructured information. And really, that was a lot of what was done to try to collapse into endotypes, this large number of patients that they were able to assess. And another approach is really around structured modeling, or the differential equation models that we've seen from predictive models from all the COVID pandemic, pharmacokinetic models, which can be used to try to assess and improve treatment, precision treatment of patients. And in today's webinar, we actually have Kostas from InSyBio has been using, he's really been using some really neat pharmacokinetic models, PK models, that are more causal models, structural models, to try to help improve analysis, in addition to the unstructured phenomenological AI and machine learning models. So it was really neat to see how some of the progress has been made in a number of different areas. Cardiology, I think, would be one that Kostas would be able to speak to, in addition to some other areas. So the highlight here is not all areas are fully approached right now for precision medicine. There's a lot of work in new areas beyond the rare diseases in oncology. And there's a lot of neat approaches to doing that, structured models as well as unstructured phenomenological models. And that's the search for the biomarkers. Sandra, if you could take one more step, please. Once we've got those biomarkers, what the heck do we do with them? And so that's this digitalization in big data. A biomarker is no good unless you can actually make a better decision with it. So can we make meaningful use of information becomes a core question. So let's not be dazzled by the science. Let's be dazzled by the great things that we can do by making better decisions around that science. Sandra, one more slide, please. And so with that in mind, I think in terms of this precision medicine space, there's the validating the biomarker, whether it's genomics or some of the other omics that we've seen, whether biomarkers are static through time. Genes tend to be static, but RNA function might be more or less active, or the number of proteins might be dynamic through time. And association with big data may or may not be the same thing as a medical or biological pathway. So we'd like to be able to think through those as we think about a biomarker. But ultimately, once we've got that, once the great science has been done with IT side, with analytics side, machine learning side, together with the medical side, working in close partnership, suppose we get all that, we still need the business model. What is the product or service? What is the actionable insight that we're going to get? How does that insight fit into pathways, whether it's a clinical pathway, medical decision-making pathway, drug discovery pathway, patient chronic disease management pathway, and finally, who's going to pay for that? And so with those questions in mind, I'd love to turn to, well, what is that business model? What are some great startup business models in this space? How do we think about customer development? How do we think about how does that fit into that pathway, and who's going to pay for it? So thank you for walking through this kind of mental framing for us all to work through together as we now introduce our three panelists. We're so delighted to be able to welcome representatives of three organizations that are supported by Loyal VC, which has had a close relationship, wonderful relationship with INSEAD for many years, and were instrumental in collaborating with us around bringing together three of the innovators in their fold. Francois Paillier, who is the CEO and co-founder of CircaGene, who I mentioned a little bit earlier in the context of looking at whole genomics. Julien Rey, who is from FBB Biomed. Welcome, Julien. and who is doing some really exciting work around liquid biopsies to replace spinal taps and helping to look at RNA analysis. And then Kostas, welcome, CTO of InSyBio, and who's done some amazing work around structural model in addition to the data analytics. And so welcome, all three of you. I'm delighted that you're all able to join today. Francois, could I ask you to maybe introduce yourself and introduce CircaGene?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Can you see me? Internet is a bit frozen. Oh, okay.
Got you good.
It should be okay. It should be okay now. So first of all, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Accenture, INSEAD, Loyal VC. That's awesome to be here today. So my name is Francois Paillier. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of CircaGene. CircaGene, basically, I created CircaGene in the 14th of July 2018 in UK. So I'm London-based, but we have staff around the world in France, US, and obviously UK. So basically, what we are doing, we are a company specialized in analysis of genetic data. Basically, we provide scientifically accurate, ethical, secure genetic analysis. So Steve, you were talking about 23andMe. Okay, they analyze 0.2% of the DNA, and we believe that it's better to have clinical grade sequencing, 100% of the DNA, 30x, so we can really mine again and again this data. It's super important. What we are doing is that we develop a digital health platform to provide the power of predictive genomics to healthcare professionals and medical consumers. What I believe is that we will switch from patient reactive medicine to medical consumer, more prevention. So I was delighted because CircaGene was awarded some prestigious things like Innovate UK Smart Grants. We developed an AI-powered diagnostic tool based on saliva samples. So basically trying to find biological signature in your saliva to predict your oral health, but also predictive genomics. We finished a clinical trial 2 weeks ago. That's going really well. Another award I wanted to mention is we've been selected as top 100 most innovative company by UNESCO, developing AI tool applied to health. Can you still see me?
Thank you, Francois. Yes, we can still see you. Thank you so much. Julien, would you care to introduce yourself and FBB Biomed?
Sure. So I'm Julien. I'm the co-founder of FBB Biomed. I also want to thank Digital at INSEAD and the sponsors, Accenture and also Loyal VC for putting this event together. Thank you for giving us this platform. So our company, FBB Biomed, which you can see right here, we are an RNA diagnostics company based in Iowa in the US. And what we do is we address pain, the pain of spinal taps or lumbar punctures. So if you are suspected of having a brain disease, then you will have a doctor puncture a hole into your spinal cord to extract fluid as part of your diagnostic process. And we provide an alternative to this risky procedure. So our minimum viable product is a blood test for brain diseases. And how does it work? We have proprietary RNA signatures and machine learning algorithms that can differentiate between specific brain diseases. And the power of the technology really is that it takes the millions of biomarkers in just one blood draw and crunches them down into a single point on a graph. And this then enables the physician to make more personalized and more accurate medical decisions. So how do we make money? Our business model is that we sell our products to clinical laboratories so that they can build their own blood tests for brain diseases. So again, scaling means that we no longer have to provide the lab ourselves. We can now have somebody else be the lab for us. So they buy our product, they build the blood test, and they sell it on to the neurologists who prescribe it, and it is going then to be reimbursed by the payer. And from the time that we founded FBB Biomed, we always considered scaling in our decision-making. And I think that's really a key differentiating factor for us, is that from the beginning, we always thought, how can we make sure that as we grow exponentially, our cost base does not grow exponentially, but remains linear or even flat. And so to us, the key most important components were customer discovery and automation, and I'm happy to speak more about that in the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julien. And Kostas from InSyBio, I think you have yet another perspective to share.
Yes, hello, Steve, and good afternoon to everyone. I would first like to thank again the organizers for inviting me in this great panel of experts. My name is Kostas Theofilatos. I'm the CTO and co-founder of InSyBio. InSyBio is a biotechnology company which was founded in 2013 with bases in United States of America and Greece. At InSyBio, we focus mostly on providing services, and we also offer an artificial intelligence-based software as a service platform for biomedical data analysis and for biomarker discovery. Our digital platform focuses mostly on providing solutions for the identification of prognostic, predictive, and pharmacodynamic biomarkers and models. The current approach for biodata analysis and biomarker discovery is highly fragmented, as you know, and involves the participation of many experts, software packages, and outsourcing services. All these are the problems that we are trying to tackle with InSyBio solution, which eliminates application complexity and increases accuracy with our patent-pending technology and platform. It was not easy. It took us more than 5 years to complete the first commercial version of our platform. But since 2019, our company is a revenue-generating company selling licenses and services of our platform, mostly in pharma, clinical research organizations, and nutrition companies. And in the last 3 years, we are doubling our revenues every year. Our main objectives are to make InSyBio Suite the platform of choice for biomarker discovery, but also to gradually transform our company from a tech business to a biotech player, since for niche domains and diseases where we have identified a need in the market, such as chronic pain and brain tumors, we have already developed our own biomarkers-based precision treatment tests that we plan to bring in the market in the next 2 years. I'm looking forward for the discussion and for further questions.
Thank you very much, Kostas. So I think you'll agree we have a very interesting and diverse and expert panel here. And so I'd love to kick this off because what you said as participating in this webinar, fully a third of you are already working in pharma, biotech, or in care services. So there's a lot of drug development and pharmaceutical space, as well as a delivery side. Now, and the panelists we've got here have very different products and situations in terms of who is their customer. If one thinks about the original 23andMe and thinks about CircaGene, well, if I am going to put saliva on a strip and figure out what my genome is, well, that's me as an end consumer. Or if I'm selling to a lab or to a hospital, that's a very different type of value proposition at FBB Biomed. And working on our drug development at InSyBio will be still different. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you each approach customer development. Like, what is the problem you're solving, and why did you choose to solve that problem? And how do you iterate to improve your value proposition for your customers? Francois, would you care to start?
Yeah, I would love to jump in. I mean, like, first for the small story is like when I developed CircaGene, I was like, let's test the market. So we started B2C and people were like, oh, I don't like 23andMe. It's not accurate enough. Do your stuff. And then we were, yeah, but that's not where the money is. We need to pivot to B2B, B2B2C. And that's what we did. So that's very interesting because I'd like to state, obviously, that health is multidimensional. You have even from the molecule up to the planet. So you have, let's say you have 3 levels. You have the patient, you have potentially the genetic neighborhood with the family because they share DNA and they share risk. You have the population. And when you see something, and let's say you do 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 patient analysis, suddenly it's valuable for the government because they can say, well, we anonymize the data and we know how many people will likely develop type 2 diabetes in the next 20 years or Parkinson's disease. So suddenly I know how many nurses I need, how many hospital I need, and so on. So just to state the obvious, this is the context. From an entrepreneur point of view, I'd like to say something which is the worst sin ever is to fall in love with your technology, not to address a problem and try to solve something that is not existing. So what not to do is basically develop something that is not a problem. So that seems obvious, Steve, but I prefer to state it because we never know. So in order to identify customer needs, basically you have to start with a problem. So don't focus on a technology or a solution. Start by identifying a problem that needs to be solved. And if you think so, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. So you need to collect evidence. So that's obvious, but you need to talk to potential customers, patients, healthcare providers, payers, the different people that may pay or be a bottleneck in the decision. So it's complex to identify a problem and to identify who is part of this problem. So I spent many years at bioMérieux. Hello to bioMérieux staff, maybe listening to us. They have this proposition, which is a triangle with the patient and basically the doctor and the lab providing. It like every innovation will be according to this angle, these three people, and you need to crack all the problems, the technology, the adoption, and so on. So if we go back to the problem itself, solve a real problem. Sometimes I need, like from Funder Institute, you need to interview at least 100 people. If you don't have 100 people answering your question, you know nothing about the market. And I don't believe that you identify a problem. Well, that seems okay. I don't know what is the right number, but I like that. So start with a problem would be the first thing. Then conduct market research. So you identify a problem, you conduct a market research to assess the size of the potential market. That seems obvious, and have a look on the competitive landscape, because maybe it's already saturated. It's like there is not much you can provide here. Your value proposition will be weak. Then once you enter, you need to engage with early adopters, people that really want that. Like my first customer was the father of a young girl. She was 7 years old, and she was sick from, like, at birth, a genetic disease. They didn't know which one. He told me, if I need to sell my car to access your diagnostic, I will. And I said, no, don't do that. He was my first customer, and we identified the rare disease by doing this really deep clinical grade sequencing and analyzing everything according to all clinical knowledge available. So make sure that you can engage with early adopters. These are your customers, and they will provide a lot. Then we saw that other people were really interested by that, potentially people that got a problem. And we were contacted by healthcare professionals saying, well, I don't know what to do. I have no clue. I'm lost. Can you provide your service so to help me? Give me ammunition so I can do my job. So we are not going to do the diagnostic. We are going to provide all the information so they can build the diagnostic and sign it. What I mean is you need to leverage partnership. It's super important. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, I would say, then you need to develop a comprehensive marketing strategy. So specific needs, pain points of your customer, social media, content marketing, and all the stuff. You know all that. You need to be out there and make sure that, well, you're known. Two last point. I'm a little bit long. Sorry for that, Steve. Data security and privacy, especially in my field, is super important. And I was super frustrated the first year when I say, well, hey, this is a free DNA kit, would you do it? And the geneticist was like, no, if you give me this for free, it does mean I am the product, I won't do that. So that's why we invented and patented a disruptive encryption technology, so we can encrypt the DNA forever and still make computation on encrypted DNA. So we can give the only private key to the final medical consumer. So even us, if they don't want us to know their result, we can do that. So privacy is super important. I hope we will talk about the different enablers, from the cost, the decreasing cost of DNA sequencing, but also cloud, multimodal AI, privacy preserving genetics, and all the stuff. And the last point I wanted to make here is, well, the reimbursement and payment model. That's super complicated, because at the end of the day, if your solution is widely deployed, it's because you cracked this problem. Who is paying for that? how do you prove that it's valuable? Who benefit from what? And this is probably something we will discuss a little bit.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Francois. So hearing initially customer and then seeing some impact at governmental level and other decision-making, medical decision-making levels. Seeing a multiple evolution there. Julien, I'd love to get your point of view around customer development as well. I know you have some really interesting insights, and actually in the Q&A box, there was somebody asking, what's going on with Alzheimer's disease, but around diagnostics and is the treatment capacity there? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this customer development issue.
So I'm very proud to say to the person who asked the question is that we have the first, very high accuracy Alzheimer's liquid biopsy, and we hope to be commercializing that soon. But we don't think that it will be our first product because there is no, let's say, no highly effective drug for Alzheimer on the market today. There is one by Biogen, but if you look at the clinical trial results, it's there was
a Lilly result from a phase 3 trial. And
the results are moderately good, but not at the level where we have a step change in the lives and quality of life of patients. Now to your question, Steve. It was actually a foundational part of our founding of the company was thinking about the market research. And I think there are two phases. The first is one where you can just do research and just use your network and your brain to get to a certain distance, in particular in terms of like, do we know where the medical need is most urgent? Do we know where the clinical need will adopt the product quickly? What is the current state of affairs now? So to make it concrete, in our case, we decided to attack the neurology market because there is no reliable diagnostics that exist today that are blood-based and RNA-based and that are high accuracy. So there is these, if you wish, symptom-based, clinical assessment-based diagnostic procedures like spinal taps, like brain scans, like clinical assessments, but nothing really definitive. And this is why we chose to go into that market. In that market, we chose to target multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's in the first step, because these two diseases have a portfolio of therapeutic options downstream. So now that information is actionable, if I gave you a definitive diagnosis for Alzheimer's, now what, right? But if I give you a definitive diagnosis for MS, for example, there's a whole range of drugs that can really modify the disease development and slow it down and really reduce the symptoms such that you can live your life, in higher quality, basically. So that thinking guided us to decide we will start with MS, we will start with Parkinson's, we will focus on the neurology market because it is underserved and overlooked, in favor of oncology. And build that first liquid biopsy for brain diseases. And then in terms of that's the phase where we can just sit down and do our own research, but it hits a hard limit. And the limit is that there is infinitely more that we don't know than what we do know. And you will not find out unless you make the effort of going out into the field and speaking to people face to face or Zoom to Zoom to find out what their considerations are. And that is where we came in with, if you wish, a hypothesis or an assumption. Our assumption was we can build a business model for an RNA diagnostics company where we are able to go to market fairly quickly compared to other case studies. And we had to find a way to structure it right. And we found out by speaking to physicians and labs and patients and investors and regulatory experts that if we are able to build the product so that we can sell it onto the lab, that's the fastest route to market. So that's why we chose to go that way, is because we don't need to have our own CLIA certified lab. We can have a CLIA lab partner be our customer. We don't have to do a full clinical trial. We can do that together with our partner. We don't have to foot the whole bill. And that kind of thinking really allowed us to structure our business model. So when we thought about it, I think about the Biomérieux example from Francois. It's complex because the patient is the beneficiary of a brain test for a blood test for brain diseases. The physician is the user and the prescriber of that blood test. The lab is the processor of that blood test. And then you have the insurer who is the payer for that same test. So if I buy a book on Amazon, I am all these 4 personalities folded into one. But if I am now buying a blood test for brain disease, suddenly I have at least 4 different stakeholder groups I have to take into consideration. Did that answer your question?
Yep, very, 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 very thoroughly. Thank you very much, Julien. I want to be sensitive that Kostas has not yet had a chance to speak up, but Francois, did you have a super quick?
Super quick, I swear.
Super
interesting what you said, Julien. I really love it. Same for us. We don't have any sequencing lab, and we believe that DNA sequencing is commoditized, and like it's a race. And if you don't have millions and millions to invest again and again, you can't follow this race. I believe we startup, we have a huge power because we have the cloud. We can have thousands, tens of thousands of processors, and we can develop these AI model really quickly, and we are super agile, and that's super important. Really quickly, Steve, regarding Alzheimer, I want to emphasize the fact that tomorrow's health will be, all the innovation will be brought by a kind of network of startups. So if I take the example of Alzheimer, we are having a look on apolipoprotein epsilon 4. So we can say in human DNA, okay, you have a huge risk of developing Alzheimer. What can we do? Well, by the way, it's a saliva sample. Let's have a look on this bacteria that is supposed to cause Alzheimer, Porphyromonas gingivalis. So we can go into the microbiome and say on these 2 axes, this is human DNA, you are in the red zone, and bacterial exposure to this particular bacteria, you're in the red zone. We need to do something, and then there is an intervention. So what I love with your example, Julien, is that we work as network with different technology to tackle the same problem.
Thank you, Francois. Kostas, thank you so much for your patience. We'd love to hear your point of view, because for you, customer is very different than in the other examples. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about how do you think about who's your customer and how do you develop that solution for them?
Yes, from our point of view, the triggering point and the problem we try to solve with the company is that after 2010, there was a very fast development of the platforms developing data, but the platforms for analyzing data did not develop that fast. So there was a big problem in pharma and nutrition companies developing a lot of genomics, epigenomics data, imaging data for the patients, but still clinical trials fail. Drugs are not delivered in a personalized manner, and many diseases are still remaining untreated. And even if we know now that using biomarkers in clinical research, for example, increases by 16% the chances of getting approved a product in the end, still this is very small, and very few clinical trials are actually using this type of technologies. So our question was how to use this data, how to optimize the use of this data to make them useful for preclinical, clinical, post-clinical research. And since our end clients now are pharma companies, to do this, we need to demonstrate them and convince them that using our solution will save them money, will make something better for them. So it's a very different perspective because we need to convince a different audience. But also something else that we encountered is that, okay, we have this problem, we had this product, but making it into a final commercial product required a lot of pivots and changes, and also the expertise required for building a commercial product that targets pharma companies requires a completely different skill set than the ones of people coming from the academia like me that are actually developing the solutions. So for all these reasons, we need front-load investments for companies like ours to build the credibility and the technology and making it and allow us to reach the companies that we are reaching and do B2B sales as we are doing. So for this point, our investors and loyal VC particularly helped us with investing as early stage. Also, something that is also important is even if you have developed a product that people want to use it, then you need to do 2 things in our business. You need to first build credibility, and this can be only built by case studies, scientific publications, white papers being out there. So you have to build all this network of information that will allow convincing the people to use your product. Otherwise, you go into very long sales cycles and problems of convincing people to buy your product. But also, it's all about network in pharma. So as the previous panel speakers told, it's very important to be open in collaborations and not trying to do everything by yourself. So this is what we also did. We partnered with a clinical research organization who already had established clients in pharma. So we are partnering with two clinical research organizations in Austin, Texas, and in Canada to allow us to reach these pharma companies through their network without having us develop all the new relationships from scratch. But also we use the advisor networks from our investors to try to allow us to reach as many people with some recommendations that will bring us easier into C-level staff of pharma companies, in front of the C-level staff of pharma companies. So this is my point of view and the difference from our approach, because we are a pure B2B sales company, and it's slightly different from the other companies that we discussed before.
Great, thank you so much, Kostas. Now, as you're integrating into healthcare systems, you're making better diagnostics, better treatments. These are influencing patient pathways. They're influencing medical decision-making processes. They're influencing diagnostic pathways, and you're collecting data that might be shared above and beyond. One of the additional questions that Matthias had raised was, around the Alzheimer's is, well, if we're going to scale, is the liquid biopsy ready for a large scale deployment? Or for some of the other tools, are we ready to get large amounts of data that might be needed to actually get the validation that would be required to validate a biomarker? How do we get all of that data? And so I'd love to hear some additional thoughts there that you might have on, well, what's going to be really required to scale this in an effective way. What are thoughts that you might have for those who are trying to get into a precision medicine space, in terms of trying to be ready to scale, given that this ecosystem is very, very important. Any further thoughts from any of you on that? Yeah, Kostas?
Yes, hi. So I wanted to note here that a couple of years ago, validation was very problematic. The platforms had a lot of technical variability. There was a lot of biases in the data that were generated based on in which platform they were done and so on. However, with the development of modern commercial platforms now, like, for example, the solutions of Olink, of SomaLogic for proteomics, there are many different labs around the world using exactly the same setup, sending their data in these companies. So validation of this type of markers is much easier nowadays. So you can just identify labs around the world that there are different cohorts that are being tested by all these platforms, like projects like UK Biobank and so on. So you can. It's very easy to find cohorts that have done these measurements, and you can do validation, as well as you have some basic funds to invest and get access to them. That's one part. The other side is regarding the model. So the more complex a model is, the more difficult it is to be validated. So for example, if we design a polygenic score of requiring a full exome analysis, then that's very difficult to validate, of course. But if you narrow this down with the use of machine learning to a very few variants, or combined with a very few protein markers, for example, then this make it viable, and it can be reproduced and applied and validated in trials, in prospective trials that are required for regulatory bodies to approve it. Steve, we cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, Despina, who's on the webinar, is mentioning the European health data space and health data at EU for secondary use of data as well. I know there are many other sources that one might consider. Is this going to be more important for validating existing companies, or is it going to be helping around sparking new companies to enter the space as well of precision medicine? What is your take on that, or do you see some other roles for some of these data repositories that are getting increasing importance?
Well, I will jump in if nobody does, but I think that's very important, because now it's like when I was talking about the worst scene for an entrepreneur, it's not to address a problem. When you have this data repository, you can actually see gaps in the market. So let's take an example. As a geneticist, I was really pissed off by the fact that basically initially the DNA data, it was from white Caucasian people. And I was like, oh, that's obvious. There is a market for, Black people, Asian people, and so on and so on. So from the data itself, you can not only see technical scientific things, but also gap in the market. So I would say you can identify opportunities, and then you can try to develop a proof of concept and test the market a little bit. So it's not only about technical, it's also, I would say, a snapshot of the market as it is.
Or lack of attention to portions of the market as well. I guess any additional thoughts about scaling that you might have, going beyond the data repository? I guess Francois and Julien, you've both mentioned that the testing is done by some another partner. So this means there's a network involved, and to scale, you have to scale with all your network partners. You have to scale with all the end users. Francois and Julien, I know you have thoughts both on that. Julien, could I ask you to chime in on that one a little bit?
Sure. So let me just make some assumptions explicit. If you assume, or if your goal is to grow exponentially, you must find a way to decouple your operations from your growth. Okay? Because otherwise you will have to grow at the same rate as which your sales are exploding. And this is not something that is physically possible. So you need, before you really hit, let's say, commercial stage, maybe beyond the first two customers, as you really expand, you have to have this completely automated system in place where you know that you can have the input come in, and then the output is going to be there, and it's going to be reliable and good. So what we did at FBB Biomed was to think about how can we, there's a business angle and the operations. So on the operations side, the thought was, how can we use software in all of our processes, business processes, administrative processes, such that we minimize the amount of money and bandwidth we spend on those. So the idea was to build a software-driven company from the beginning, and that has served us very well. So the output of that was that we have a very low cost operating base, we have a very low cash burn rate, thanks to the fact that we are using all these new subscription-based software services, which allow us to really have this very sort of lightweight cost base. And then on the business side, that means that right now we are in the process of building a backend where a lab technician will be able to upload the file from the sequencer, and it will be straight through processed through our algorithms. The output data is going to be generated and will then be shared back to the lab. So if you think about, let's say we have 3 lab customers, each sending us 10 samples a day, you would have to manually do this, like 30 samples a day. That's not possible. You cannot do that. So what you have to do is to first have this prototype ready, this machine, where you can put the input, which is, let's say, the standardized sequencing format from an Illumina machine that have the vast majority of the sequencing market, and then the output is some kind of a file, could be an Excel file, an XML, whatever it may be, but some kind of analytics results that are summarized, and then that the lab, in our case, can communicate back to the physician. So having this in place is really important, because otherwise you might be basically putting the cart in front of the oxen, and you will be overwhelmed by the amount of work that is coming your way. So this is why now, before we have signed up our first commercial customer, we are building right now this automated engine such that we can then scale from there and not have any, if you wish, heartbreaks along the way.
Right. Excellent. And it looks like you have a couple of people giving you a thumbs up in the audience. Thank you very much for that input. Any additional feedback on this this notion of how to scale, if you will? Yeah.
Well, I was about to give like pretty much exactly the same answer. So we are virtualize our production tool. So I won't add anything because we think it's the right way to do it as well. So I will not enter into this detail. Maybe I will take just like 1 minute, Steve, to talk about the difference. As a biologist by background, what I try to identify is like the different bottleneck. Okay, next bottleneck is this one. So I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're willing to enter the market, maybe keep in mind that you need to have a look on the funding. Obviously, I won't talk about your the technical aspect, but it's really costly potentially to add, well, to provide a service or a product that is innovative, especially right now. The funding, it's really challenging to access funding right now. So make sure that you have something where you maximize the added value according to the money you have. And that's why digital health and AI is just like, it's amazing. You can really develop something quickly and very useful, really quickly and cost effectively, I would say. So funding is important. Regulation, we did not talk that much about regulation. To navigate the regulatory landscape is complex and time consuming. In my case, in genetics, it's like a fragmented landscape. And it does mean for each country, we have a different go-to-market strategy. It can be nightmarish, but that's the truth. It's not, you don't have one unified regulatory landscape. So think about, okay, as you scale up, how are you going to switch to this go-to-market strategy here on top of the logistics and all the stuff that's super critical for us? It's very important. And at the same time, it's also an opportunity, because if you go to UK government or French government, they say, oh, I love you. That's amazing. I love what you're doing. Don't worry, you will have your regulatory bubble where you can work and demonstrate that health economics, all this is working. So make sure that the regulatory side, well, it's on your side and you do most of it. Other stuff, intellectual property, make sure that obviously you can build your IP portfolio. I won't develop, but that's obvious. Adoption, make sure that, yeah, people are comfortable with that, because sometimes you need to have a gap, because if it's just slightly better, people won't switch. You need to have a big gap between what is existing and what you propose. Then they will switch, because there is an energy cost to switch to a new solution. So make sure that that's a big one. And we talked about the reimbursement. That's super important from the beginning to
cutting
think
out
about
the cost leading to that reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
So we have actually a question that's been put into the chat box, and we've got about 5 minutes left here, 4 or 5 minutes. But this question has just gotten a bunch of thumbs up. And so I'd love to raise that out to you. The question is, from a customer patient point of view, what happens if the confidence level and trust in the technology adoption drops? For example, suppose there's a public issue regarding a treatment or diagnosis provided with the help of AI or machine learning tools, which wasn't accurate and had consequences for patients. In such an example, how does the ecosystem resolve this? Accountability issues, how to respond to that? I know that that's kind of a bomb to throw here, but given that so many people thumbs upped it, I wanted to raise that. If we can have a short answer to that, please. Yeah, Kostas?
Yes, so I think being based on AI predictions is not different than being based on biochemical examinations we are doing. So, for example, when we have a heart attack, then we go into a hospital and they measure our troponin levels, and then the clinician takes this and take a decision about what happened to us. It's the same that will happen with AI-based models. These are not models that take decisions by themselves. These are just supportive tools to the clinician to assist them take the decision, having more information available and having more guidance about what the data and the measurements tell to him. And this is why there is a big shift nowadays in artificial intelligence and machine learning into causal models and interpretable models so that they are not black boxes nowadays. And clinicians also have some training during their studies about how to use and interpret these models and how to use them into clinical decisions. And I think that's the way to go. Of course, there are supporting evidence that we should have to have a market like that, even as a clinical decision support system, to have safety, to have measured accuracy in prospective studies. But if we cover this basis, then it's nothing more than a simple biochemical examination that we do nowadays.
Great. Thank you very much, Kostas, for addressing that. Yeah, people might react the same as to non-AI tools, but at the same time, people react to a car accident differently than they might react to a driverless car accident. So that's a very interesting topic to dive into. I want to be a little bit sensitive of time. I'm so thankful for everybody who's joined on the webinar. I'm so thankful for all of our panelists here. If I could just maybe ask for literally a 30-second closer from each of the panelists of, what is it that you might have to say to the rest of the group? What somebody is considering getting into precision medicine, what's the top thing that you think that an organization like a Loyal VC could help bring to the table in terms of helping guide those next steps as you go forward? Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I can jump in really quick, 30 seconds. So as I said, start with a problem, make sure that you have a proof of concept, and make sure you minimize your burn rate. Julien talked about that. That's super important, especially these days. Make sure that this is a suitable solution before scaling up. And you need to check all the usual stuff, like what's my margin and so on, because if you're not extremely good, the scale up will just kill your company. So you need to put things in the right order. Start with a problem and develop a very innovative solution, patent it, make sure that your funding is appropriate and you're not like in the middle of the river and you stop there. No, you need to have this inflection point in the development of your company so it does make sense. So you just like grow with these different phases. I will stop here because I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, that's great. Julien, any final remarks that you might have?
Yes, I mean, whoever you are, a founder, an investor, a corporate executive, always keep in mind that you know a lot less than you believe. And there is no way to know what you don't know other than to be exposed to it randomly. And by randomly, I mean is you go into the field, you speak to people that might not have direct connection to your business yet, or who might be tangential to your interests. But you need to speak to all these different stakeholders because you will gain a much deeper understanding of the ecosystem in which you operate. And you simply cannot, there is no other way to find that information other than being in the field and speaking to people. That's the only way you can learn beyond your own sort of, research capabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Julien. Kostas, any parting comment?
Yes, I agree with both Francois and Julien about the importance of building a product that is actually needed and testing different things to identify this. But in addition to that, because even if you have the perfect product, doesn't mean that you will succeed. I would recommend building a group of different experts covering different bases, business, science, and so on, and then establish a good network before you do anything. Because even if you have a good solution, if you don't find the means to put it out as a nice business product, then you will not succeed.
No. Thank you very much, Kostas. Francois, Julien, Kostas, I'm very grateful for your perspectives. I mean, each of you are working in different spaces of this precision medicine world. And what I'm taking from this is nail it before you scale it. It's an often heard word. We're in this space of a lot of technology, digital technology, medical technology, the complex patient decision-making, complex regulatory and reimbursement environments. So nail it before you scale it, and be humble. You have a lot of different stakeholders that are all very bright, all trying to work together, and we need to work together. Who's paying? Whose problem are you solving? In which pathway? And so it's very nice to hear all of your different thoughts. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you everybody in the audience who were able to join us here today. like to thank Accenture once again, and thank Loyal VC, and thank Digital at INSEAD, the Lifelong Learning Hub, for all your support. Thank you so much, Sandra. I appreciate that. So looking forward to seeing you on the next webinar.